Hey guys, this is Miko here. I wanted to make a video on what the meta has panned out to be so far in terms of things that have differentiated from last meta with the introduction of ultimates and Runeglass, as well as talking about some potential builds that I think are a little bit slept on that might creep into play. But in general, I'd say stuff has changed less than expected, but the playstyle of builds has changed a lot. I have a few VODs from Wars. I haven't posted the East VODs, but I might do that. But in general, I'd say right now stuff dies extremely fast compared to last meta because of the cleansing nerf with the cooldown. Because it's like a 30-second cooldown now, people actually have to save those cleanse pots, and when they do that, there's times where you just get 100 0 and I'd say it's very common for people to die a lot more this meta than last meta, as well as some bugs being in the game with certain abilities not working properly. Like you'll press a cleanse pot and it just won't go through for some reason. There's a bug with the ice tomb where if you go into it, if someone hits you while you're going into it, it doesn't appear to actually go off, and you just don't get the value of the ice tomb, and you just instantly die basically because you don't have the extra HP. So that's a thing. As well as like a lot of other interactions that I won't be talking about here because they're more exclusive to top end PvP oriented stuff, and I want to keep that to myself, I guess, until it becomes more widely known, and then I could talk about it. But there's a lot of interesting things that the ultimates in Runeglass have brought into the meta. But I think the ultimates are by far a lot more impactful than the Runeglass. The Runeglass at this point seems debatably even being worth it. I'd say that the only rune glass that are in conversations to be actually slotted at the moment are the ones that do fire, like they do a specific elemental damage if you are heavily scaling off that elemental and you have a high DPS output. So like for muskets they're insane, for fire staffs they're pretty good, for blunderbuss they're pretty good. But then like most classes it doesn't feel as insane as people thought they would be. And all the utility based rune glasses seem kind of borderline useless with the cooldowns that are on them. And the trade-offs for those rune glass don't seem worth it. Which is interesting because at one point they were extremely buffed on the PTR, and then as some of you will know, they tuned those down and nerfed them, and from my perspective, they seems like they over nerfed them to the point where most of their rune glasses aren't actually useful, but they are really interesting nonetheless. But that being said, getting into builds, I would say compared to last patch, if you were IG VG player last patch, the change in your playstyle that you'll have to make is that you will have to be not near the clump when you don't have your abilities, because if you're near the clump when you don't have your abilities, you will just instantly die. And that applies to everyone with the cleanse pot change. If you are near the clump and you don't have a cleanse pot, you are expecting to die within the next 10 seconds, and there is no way of changing that. So with that change being introduced, ice. Let me see if I have the tree. Yeah, I'd say ice gauntlet is still being used just for the ability to have another cleanse because it is that necessary with the cleanse pot nerf. And it seems like the survivability overall is a semi must have with the popularity of certain runes. I will say I think there is definitely a place in the meta that we are missing at the moment where people run runes like the stone form ones. This first one is being run by mostly healers right now, but the second one is very interesting for some players because you can get these ultimates fairly quickly in a war. Like I've seen them be charged in like 30 seconds to a minute, and if you are getting those very quickly, that is basically the same cooldown as an ice tomb, and that's can be very very helpful for some builds. Like I think if you were running BBVG, that is a possibility to run this stone form with that and make that build a lot better, as well as some more greedy builds that were not possible before the stone form makes possible, which is I think a really good introduction to the game because for a while there's been like a consensus where you have a primary weapon and then you have a utility weapon, and that utility weapon's always going to help you get away from things, and you're basically only using your primary weapon for most of New World combat. But with the introduction of this ultimate, that has the ability to change things. I would say right now it's not a very popular ultimate to take unless you're a healer, just due to how powerful Detonate and Vine seem to be. These two seem to be the most popular ones. There are a few other kinds of Detonate that are being run, like Cunning. I have seen be run by mostly bruisers, but it has been run by other people as well. The trade-off here is this one you get Empower on it, which is nice, and then this other one you do more damage. But then if you don't have the 150 int perk, then that damage is not being as significant as it could be. So it's like this build that with the detonate one, that's the brutal version, is a lot better with like Firesoft per se than it is with bruisers, but it's still not bad with bruisers. But this one might be better with bruisers than Firestaffs. It's like some niche situations there which are very fun because there's just multiple ways to define your role in the meta, which is interesting. So far, I think I've tested IGVG, did not feel nearly as powerful as it did last patch, which is a big surprise to me. It's like when you're alive, it feels good, but then you have the ability to die very, very fast, and it does not seem like you could run that build in medium the way that you were last patch and be doing well in wars. So I would expect for people to switch that to a different either class or change that build a bit, or have a different playstyle where they're playing very, very split from the clump and then engaging hard when the clump appears. I'd say this is the primary way that people are running Ice Gauntlet now. There's a few flex points in here, like this blocking one could go in a critical rejuvenation if you really want it, but mana's not really been an issue for most people, so it's like, why not take the block? The block also got buffed significantly and it seems very strong, and I think that's one of the better parts of IGVG right now, which is very weird to say. But if you're in heavy and you're using the block and you get staggered now, the animation of being staggered is basically non-existent. So it feels very good to be blocking in clumps. Like I would say if you get root comboed by the vines, and blocking more often than not will get you out of that alive more than iframing, because people could chain the roots and you just don't have enough iframes to really outlast that. So block is a good solution to that problem, or a better solution I should say say than dodging, because there isn't really a good solution to vines at the moment, due to it being a mass AoE root, applies a 20% rend, and you're just kind of sitting there and hoping you don't die. But yeah, I'd say overall the meta hasn't changed a ton. IGVG, I'd say went down a notch or two in terms of viability. IGBB got better. BBVG got a lot better. I think it's very runnable. It's just a few playstyle adjustments. I posted one VOD of this. It seems like it's getting some traction. I wouldn't say I played like super well with it, but then I learned a lot from that and think it could be that build has the potential to be very, very good this patch. SNS BB, the one I was running before that I thought would be good, it felt good. I would say the blocking with the shield is definitely a bait, because of all the disease and roots that just get applied to you. You just can't stand there and block with the shield typically. But if you are getting pressured and you get rooted and then you pull out the shield to block, then it's very good. And then if you uh, also use the Treacherous Crits and Plague Strikes thing that I was running last patch, and it's like a very, very good build. The only weird part about SNSBB is the SNS is definitely a secondary and not a primary. And I think that applies to most SNS builds at the moment. Like, blocking feels strong with the roots just because you don't have enough iframes to really outlast anything right now. Due to the fact that like a Void Gauntlet guy could literally scream you into a Vine root into another scream and you're just stuck there for almost 10 seconds. And because that exists, you cannot really iframe super consistently in that. And since you can't do that, blocking is just a better alternative, which makes SNS a little bit better, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily good. It makes things like Great Sword particularly interesting with all the blocking passives that are involved with that and the damage reduction. I'd say Shirking Fort got even better somehow. just because it's one of the only ways to keep you alive while you're being stuck in roots. Because you can that the fortify you gain can override some of the rends that you have on you and enable you to like live a little bit longer. Ice Gauntlet feels pretty good because it charges ults very fast. Void Gauntlet feels pretty good because it charges ults very fast. The problem with those classes is just survivability. Bruisers just somehow got even better. Like the ability to grab someone into a detonate in a maelstrom. I've seen like 4 or 5 clips of just people just killing 10 people with like one bruiser now, and that's like not very uncommon. So these detonate ones are like nothing to laugh at, and they're very scary, and I'd say that they're almost more oppressive than the roots that are going out, because the roots definitely can set up people to be killed, but they can't kill people alone. So if you have like a 10v10 and then someone has a root off and gets the root off on the other team, like you are definitely winning that. But detonate, man, it's something else. You could like 1vx with detonate, and it's crazy. So I'd say definitely the if you are just gonna get into PvP and you are looking for ways to get there, if you don't have an ultimate, you with this patch, I don't think you're competitively viable even if you're a seasoned player. Like if I were to take the best player on East with no ultimate versus an average player on East with a ultimate, you'd probably slot the player that was average with the ultimate. They are that impactful right now. So I would say definitely get those, and then the Runeglass, I would say don't rush it. The prices are very high and the benefit seems minimal, but I think they will be good for bruisers and they will be good for fire users in particular and dex players. The reason why they are good for bruisers is not actually because of the things you put in a weapon, but the fact that you can get, I think that they're called punishing. Yeah, you can get these punishing ones, and then you basically you have 5% extra damage as a melee, and you're trading off like a little bit of fortification for that, but it's overall worth it. It's like you're getting a slash damage ring on for free. So I would say that's definitely worth it for a lot of classes, but if you're a utility-based class, then these rune glass gems are sadly not really worth it right now because the utility-based gems just don't do enough. The stamina one, if you stack this, you get 9 stamina every 3 seconds from like a normal like hit. Like that's inconsequential. It will not keep you up. It won't really have a major impact on your gameplay, so sadly it's not really being run. And it's a little sad because there's all these new gems that seem really cool, but I'd say a lot of them aren't useful. The mana one, mana's never been a problem with the pots being in the game, so that one's not really useful. Leeching is very interesting and has the potential to be very good, but the cooldown on it again makes it not very useful. Because if you have like a so your void gauntlet, right, and you have your orb, and you throw out your orb and you hit a clump. Every time that orb ticks one person is going to count as one of these effects and put that cooldown on cooldown. So you basically just effectively do not heal due to this having a cooldown on it, which means that these are basically not viable in terms of PvP if you do lots of damage spread out. But if you have something like, I don't know, a blunderbuss with mortar hypothetically, then you're doing consistent damage at a bit like a large amount of consistent damage that's spread out, and like in that case this will be viable, but I don't know if you would even like want to go down that path per se. It seems kind of weird. But yeah, I'd say that's the trend with the rune glass. A lot of people are running it in their weapons. It does do a little bit more damage in your weapon, but overall, not exactly sure if it's worth it. It's like very marginal, and then you have like conditionals. Like you don't really want to slot the ones that are a 40% elemental because it has like the worse scaling than opal in most cases, or so usually people are running these with like either an opal or a malachite, and then they're just taking the burn effect just to have the burn effect. But the burn effects can also override each other, so this like creates a lot of problems, and it's very interesting from a handling an army perspective of like who runs what. but I would not say that these are mandatory at all, nor close to being like hard meta. You definitely can avoid running these for most players, but they are very strong for players that deal a lot of amounts of damage. Like if you are on musket, I would definitely run these because it will just increase your damage output. But if you're on like void gauntlet, I don't know if it's exactly worth it because the tier 2 ice is generally more powerful. But I can get to that in a later video, but wanted to make a quick one on what's being run. I think most builds from last patch are still viable. If you're running Rapier, you probably want to find a different secondary. It's borderline worthless. I've seen healers run Blunderbuss, I've seen healers run Hatchet, I've seen healers run Greatsword, I've seen healers run SNS, I've seen healers run Spear. There's just not a Rapier just feels awful. You can't gen stamina while you're using your abilities, and your abilities don't consistently give you stamina now. And your repost is like almost a death trap for you. So it's like not a very good weapon anymore, but otherwise everything else is fairly similar to what it was last patch. So, yep, I'll see you guys in the next one, and I'll keep posting VODs so that you guys can see what it's like to play in this meta, where people get blown up and die within fractions of a second. But it is very interesting and very different.